Hello and welcome to Module 12. In this module, we covered postmodernism, which brings us up to the present state of philosophy, at least kind of, because there is a whole lot of ideas that the book didn't cover. The video by Dr. Jordan Peterson presents us with a superb summary of postmodernism and its problems, and it would be pointless for me to try to top it. But part of this course is designed to allow us to trace our current ideas back to the earlier ones. And so what I can meaningfully add to this discussion is the connection of postmodernism to the earlier ideas from which it came. Let's take a look at the four core ideas of postmodernism. 1. Postmodernism denies the possibility of truth as a concept. Not only can we never get the truth, there is no sense in even trying to aim for it. Why is that? Well, because postmodernism denies our access to any kind of a metaphysical foundation, which means that there is no objective way that values can or should be structured meaningfully. It's all arbitrary. And because postmodernism denies any ability for human language or thought to correspond to the real world, and therefore no possibility of truth. Second, postmodernism denies the notion of morality. There is no such thing, and there cannot be such a thing. Why is that? Well, because morality is based on the ideas of truth, metaphysics, and the ability to express ideas and values, and all of those things just got denied by the earlier point. For authors like Rorty, additionally, following the Darwinian implications also means that anything like an objective morality, which is the point of the entire field of ethics, cannot exist. Third, postmodernism affirms relativism, but does not offer any kind of anchoring of the social values in the truth. It's one thing to say that people have adapted different customs and rules because of their differing circumstances. It's an entirely different thing to say that all these are equally meaningless. Traditionally, the idea was that there is the human telos, and using it, you could adapt to different contexts and make it work best under those circumstances. But now, there is no telos, only random, meaningless behaviors. This is the idea that there is no canonical or privileged interpretation of the world, as Dr. Peterson puts it, because no interpretation can be better than any other. And 4, finally, postmodernism paradoxically argues that the only mode of interpreting the world is through power relations, and then in terms of the masses, not individuals, so only by some kind of identity groups. Now this is because the groups are related to the type of things that are striving for power and domination. The paradox is that if there is no canonical or privileged interpretation, how can anyone claim the interpretation by power relations between groups is the way that we should interpret the world? Again, something like this makes sense in Marx, but it really does not make any sense in postmodernism. This power relations point is super important, as Dr. Peterson noted. Part of the reason it is important is because, as Foucault says, all power is a matter of struggle, conflict, and war, and power is everything. To put it a different way, the only way you relate to anything at all is through violence. You are either the perpetrator of violence or the victim. There is no other option. And this is true, quite literally, for every relation you ever have. The relation with your parents, power and domination. Relation with your significant other, power and domination. Relation with people of the opposite gender, power and domination. Relation with your work, power and domination. The act of speaking, power and domination. Every single thing and every single act is an act of power and domination, and therefore it is also an act of violence. So, let's see how these things connect. The denial of truth as an eternal entity is Hegelian, Marxist, and Nietzschean. The denial of possibility of an objective morality is Hegelian, Marxist, Nietzschean, and Darwinistic. The affirmation of relativism is Hegelian, Marxist, Nietzschean, and Darwinistic, but unlike Marx or Hegel, or even Nietzsche, there is no anchoring in anything like ultimate meaning, or purpose. Reduction to power relations is Marxist, Nietzschean, and Darwinistic. Like Marxists, postmodernists argue that everything comes down to power, and thus violence is always the answer and it is always justified. Unlike Marxists, they don't believe that there is an end to this process. Unlike Nietzsche, power is not a matter of self-affirmation, but of merely plodding on in the status quo. And like Darwinism, postmodernists see the use of violence as a means of continuing society through, quote, adapting it through the use of violence. Since we have already covered the way that these thinkers relate back to the earlier ones, it's fairly easy to see that the state of modern philosophy is generally a matter of working out the implications of older philosophies or of taking those ideas to their logical conclusions. In a way, the postmodernists generally looked about, noticed that the pillars of ideas that are supposed to be holding up the society were missing, and they simply cleared out the unsupported notions that still remained. Obviously, the introduction of violence and power relations is a separate bit of nonsense they introduced, borrowing from Marx, but one that they've continued to push wholeheartedly. So, where is postmodernism today? Well, you can look about you and see it everywhere. Every time someone speaks about identity groups in any way, they're parroting a postmodern idea. Anytime you see claims like political correctness, which are today generally based on identity groups, that's postmodernism at work. Anytime you hear cries of racism, sexism, and the various other isms on the basis of some identity difference instead of an objective analysis of facts demonstrating the claim, that's postmodernism. Now, just to be clear, I'm not claiming that racism, sexism, and the other isms are not real. It would take a different kind of dumb, deaf, and blind to make that claim. But not every case of a man being promoted over a woman, or vice versa for that matter, is sexism. Maybe, just maybe, the person promoted was actually more deserving, more competent, and a better choice for the position. The failure to think in terms of these nuances is where the postmodernists tend to be located. That's not because they're trolling, though that might be the case as well, but because for them, every interaction of men and women, white and black, old and young, is an expression of one side trying to dominate the other, and that is always a form of violence. The objective facts don't really matter because there is no objective truth. If we take the claims of postmodernists seriously and carry them out to their logical conclusion, we end up with the kinds of problems that Polanyi noted led to the two world wars. If truth, morality, and intellectual freedom do not have value in and of themselves, then the outcome is that any idea, no matter what, is as good as any other one. And so life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are equivalent to death, slavery, and the pursuit of malevolence. Freedom of speech and absolute censorship are on equal value footing. And if the only meaningful relation is that of power, and therefore dominance, then any act whatsoever is an act of violence and war of my group against yours. And that means that you can and should answer with violence. Not that you have any choice, because everything is violence. And so, because freedom of speech means that I get to speak, and my speaking is always an exercise of power designed to let me dominate you, you get to use violence against me, including physically attacking or lynching me. Literally. And so, you can see the freedom of speech getting killed off in a hurry. But let's take a look at another problem here. The reduction to power relations means that no one can ever aim at equality. Why not? Because all human relations are an attempt to dominate the other. We can never act in a way that is not designed for power or domination. And therefore, by our very existence, we always aim at the superiority of our group over all others. To be a white abolitionist in the antebellum period is still to project power, domination, and violence over the black population. And that's no matter what you do to help end their status as slaves. This also means that any social justice allies are an incoherent idea. I cannot support any other group because even in my apparent support, all that is happening is I am projecting the power and domination of my group over that other one. Not only is this incoherent in terms of actual behavior, Foucault would say that it's not even physically possible, it also makes no sense from the kinds of meanings we can pull out of that power relation. If all there is the oppressor and the oppressed, the idea of seeking equality instead of superiority and domination for yourself or anyone else is like saying that you're okay with being part-time oppressed, because their equality means that you're dominating them and they're dominating you at 50% of the time each. So who exactly wants to be dominated and subjugated for half their life? And this leaves us in something of a Hobbesian state of nature, a war of all against all, nasty, brutish, and short, but in identity group clans instead of our own. And unlike for Hobbes, there is no possibility of a Leviathan rising up to unite us.